Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Wanders. I'm the president and CEO of Anderson Ranch Art Center. On behalf of our board chair, Sue Hostetler, our board of trustees, and our staff, I'm just really pleased to welcome you all to our first 2020 Summer Series lectures. I do very much wish we were all gathered here in Shermer Hall on campus. We miss you, but I'm happy to see so many people gathered online and keeping this community going. The ranch is healthy, and we look forward to seeing you when it's safe to come back. Before I get started, I wanted to quickly recognize the just incredible lifetime of support that has been given to the ranch by Toby Devin Lewis. Toby continues to underwrite this series year after year and has done so much for the ranch. So I really appreciate Toby and her family's underwriting of the ranch in this series. And of course, I want to recognize all of the members of our community that help underwrite this series. Their names were flashing through in the slides before the program, but if I list them all, we'll never get to Mark and Helen. So thank you all. The ranch is really strong because of the loyal support of our community members. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to manage some Q&A at the end of the program. So if you want to ask a question, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see, if you hover over it with your mouse, you'll see a spot to enter Q&A. Those questions will come to me, and at the end of the program, when Helen and Mark ask for questions, I will propose the questions that I see there in that Q&A window. So please enter questions anytime throughout the program, and I will manage them at the end of the program. Well, you're here to hear, or you've joined us to hear this program between Mark Grotjahn and Helen Molesworth. Mark, just an amazing painter, artist. We really look forward to hearing this conversation. So please, I will pass over to Helen and Mark. Enjoy the conversation, and I'll pop back in at the end of the program to manage those Q&A questions. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Peter. I'm just giving that. Can everybody hear me? Did I get a thumbs up on that? Awesome. I'm so glad to be able to be in dialogue with Mark today, even though, of course, I wish we were doing it all in person in Snowmass as well. The internet gods have given us this, and so we are going to gratefully accept their internet god offering. I'm going to just share my screen so that we can look at pictures while we do this. And there we go. So Mark, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I just sent a text message to see if I'm blown out by the light, and I got a response back that I am. So I shut my shades. No nature today.
There you go.
It's nice to see you. I also wish we were out in Colorado. I thought for sure we'd be doing it there.
I know, and I was actually so thrilled when I heard last summer, I think you sent me some iPhone pics of you fishing by a stream in your house in Old Snowmass.
Yes.
And I got so excited about the fact that we were going to be summer neighbors.
100%. And I will take you fishing.
Oh, I would actually really, really love that.
Great.
So Mark, we're gonna, your studio really graciously put together a PowerPoint, and I've kind of trimmed it down to 3 different series or bodies of work that I thought we might talk about. And they're all relatively recent. We start in 2014 and get pretty much up to the present. And one of the things I've always been so interested in about your work is how it seems to combine things that don't go together. So on the one hand, these paintings, these circus paintings, which you can see here in this install shot, are super exuberant. They're very colorful. They have a really, really high degree of texture, which I'm going into an image of a particular image now, or a specific painting now, rather. And these are things that I would call sort of in the wheelhouse of art history, we might call these like expressionistic, right? Like they bear the traces of the artist's labor. Like we can really see that you worked on these. We can see your handwork. We can see the all of your presence as an artist, which are some of the hallmarks of expressionism. And yet, on the other hand, they're really repetitive. You make series of works in which you go in after a kind of problem, a visual problem, a formal problem, perhaps maybe those problems take other dimensions as well. And you like grind down on the repetition of them. This is not at all what I associate with expressionism, right? I associate expressionism with this kind of like one and done big emotional statement. And I guess I just wanted to sort of start with some basic big parameters before we drill down. What's at stake for you as a painter, as an artist, in the repetition of a form over and over again, the way you are so known for doing?
Right. So you're kind of you've chosen the series of faces called the circuses, and it's maybe the starts like maybe the last 3 or 4 years of me painting the faces. I've been painting for a while, kind of hobby-like or hobby light, while I was doing my butterflies that were extremely rigid. I took some of the leftover paint on cardboard and would just do faces. I had a couple exercises, some background activities that I was doing. And I had a show, I think in 2007, where I showed 10 butterflies. And then in another room, I showed 5 faces. And when I saw those faces together, I was like, maybe there's something here that can really hold a room. The butterflies were nice because they were very rigid. They had a line down the middle and a line on 2 sides, basically. And then they were broken up by triangles each section. And so I went to work and I started in this triangle and I worked counterclockwise until I hit the top, and then I finished the middle. And so once I hit that system, I went to work and I knew I had a job. And my job was to do as many triangles as I could that day. And as I refined it, it became, I had one color and then I'd slowly take another color. So I could have a light blue and then take a dark blue and just take one dollop in. And so slowly it would change. And so when I started doing the faces, all the faces were different. There were eyes here, there were eyes there. One of the things that I was interested in is well, I had gone to minimalism for my own reasons, and I got a charge out of that because at the time there was very little of that going on. And then it just seemed exciting to just go ab X. No, to go like 80s. 80s.
Right.
What do they call them?
Neo-expressionism.
Yeah, the neo-expressionists.
Yeah, Schnabel and those guys. Yeah.
100%, which is like when I hit college and I was like 19 years old and I could go to the library and see like all the magazines together, they'd bind them by the year, you know, and you could just, and see all like that. And to go in there and to go and see if I could make good art using using Picasso's eyes. Like, right. Can you do that? Because it's such a kind of a cliche. And when a young artist declares themselves, at least it used to be like this, declares themselves avant-garde, the first thing they do is the eyes are crooked. So within that, like, can I do something that's interesting? And so I would do the butterflies. I just did one at a time, hit them, done, like a marathon running, good shape, worker. And then these, it was once I gave myself strictly to the faces, they were all different. So there were eyes here, eyes here. So you're hitting me near the end when I have refined it to a motif. And I'm not sure that that's what I set out to do, but I saw something I liked and it was this. And so basically on the left there are 2 eyes. On the right, there are three eyes with one eye overlapping. And then there are these big circular noses and then kind of a lotus eye on the top. And then with a lot of these from the lotus eye, I would do like a 2-color band, maybe, I don't know, 5 lines, 6 lines this way. And I think this way. And so that was the start. And then I'd fill it in, and then I'd start spiraling the eyes out and bringing the strings in. I call them a circus because these things reminded me of the banners that the lady on the horse is riding in the circus, in the Seurat painting.
Right.
I don't remember if it's called circus. So basically when I feel a little jacked and I haven't had any coffee, I had a little Red Bull.
You're doing great. Go, keep talking.
Yeah, you know, I get excited talking about my work. So then, so the advantage to getting the motif is I do not have to think, it's not as rigid as the butterflies, but I don't have to think about composition, and I don't want to think about composition. I don't want to sit back from the painting and contemplate. I just
Okay, wait, I got to interrupt you for a second. I got to interrupt you for a second because that's fascinating that you don't want to think about composition to me.
Right.
So I guess I have a couple of questions there, because one of the things that this painting is like the more I looked at it, getting ready to talk to you today, the more mind-boggling I found the composition, because you cannot land as a viewer, or I cannot land as a viewer in any kind of figure ground relationship. I don't know what's above and below, like things just keep moving. And I think that there's this kind of like centrifugal force in the picture that also doesn't make sense to me as composition, because I feel like what's happening is the picture creates all this sense of movement. It doesn't sort of settle. And so I'm curious, one, it is a technical thing, like, do you make preparatory drawings? Does that help you out of the problem of composition? Or two, is the motif, like, what about motif? Well, no, let me phrase it differently. What is it about thinking about composition while you're working that you don't want to have happen?
While I'm thinking the painting, this is how it feels. The painting is not getting done. And so I have some anxiety that until I'm really physically problem solving, it just feels like anxiety. It's not a joy for me to sit back and contemplate what would make the thing work. I'd rather just get up there and do it and see if the thing works. So there's an impatience, there's anxiety. In terms of the prep drawings, what I would do is I'd have my guys at the end of the day, I'm not 100% sure if I did it with these, but I probably did, had a picture taken and they'd make quads, and then I'd cut them out. They'd bring them to me at night. I'd cut them out, stick them on singular on paper, and I just do some lines over it. So when I got to work, I know where to start. So I went into work knowing where to start. And once I got to start, and it's also why all my paintings, I believe, are always wet into wet. They're not wet into wet because I love that process. It's I will not wait for them to dry. So I figured out, like through trial and error, how I can paint wet into wet.
That's so interesting, but isn't it's sort of my understanding that painting wet onto wet is harder.
Right. I think that's what people say.
Like, that's what painters say. Like, I was just at a dinner. It was I felt, I don't mean to name drop. I name drop in the spirit of like total awe at my own life,
Right.
where I was sitting in between Lisa Yuskavage and Luke Toymans.
Yes.
And Lisa asked Luke a super technical painting question, and he kind of poo-pooed it. And then Lisa said to him, "Hey, dude, I know you paint wet on wet. Like, you've got to answer me."
Yeah.
And it was clear it was a really difficult thing to do. So I wonder why I wonder why difficulty trumps patience in your life.
Well, I think the patience and the anxiety with the waiting is more uncomfortable than figuring out how to go wet into wet. I think
Wow.
that's it. I mean, that's really understanding it kind of on a psychological level, right? And
Right.
then in that though, to protect myself, or because that's the way that I like to work, the techniques have kind of come out of that.
Interesting. So, do you have this sense that the face that these circus pictures, that the face is both receding and emerging? Like, is that something you're aware of?
I'm aware that people talk about space in my paintings, things being in front and in back, and then the space that it creates here and there. And I have guys in my studio that talk to me about my work like that. But I'm a real literalist, so I see what is physically on one thing on top of another.
Right.
That's how I see it. I see these as representational. I mean, like abstract versus non-objective. Like, okay, technically maybe we go on, they're abstract, but to me they are faces. Like they are face related. And because
Right.
I'm painting a thing, even it gets me out of probably some compositional things that that you can do when you're doing a figure that you can't when it's, you know, more like Mondrian. It's just as different, you
Right.
know, because you have like the story, like a person on a grass hill means something, you know, like different parts. I don't know.
I'm curious about the faces thing, because I think I was so prepped as like a viewer of your work to come to the work in the spirit of abstraction, which means I come to it thinking about process, and I think about like color and form and texture. But these and the first face pieces you did, and then some of the early sculpture, which we'll talk about in a moment, I was really arrested by this, what I felt almost was like a haunting. Like this is abstraction being haunted by this thing called a face, which is, you know, for many of us, the most, you know, it's an incredibly profound form of address, to look at someone, to know they're looking at you, to try and figure out who they are based on how they look and their vibe and their energy. And you bring a lot of that kind of looking to a painting too. You know, you walk up to it, you walk back from it, it changes on your mood. It is itself, but it's also always standing in for something else, you know, just like people are themselves, but they're always also kind of representing other things. And I was curious about if you think about the faces, like how we read faces and how we read a painting, you know, how, I guess I'm trying to ask in some way, like, they're faces, but do they also then have all of the back end of what it means to have a face? Do they have bodies? Do they have personalities for you? Are you having an engagement with each one that you make like you might have an engagement with another person?
I think that I have personal relationships with the paintings in terms of I feel differently about them and I feel more connected to one than another. But I feel that with the non-objective paintings as well. Some paintings, like the one I did, I believe it's number 3 out of this. I believe this is number 6. I said looks the most like me. And I don't know, it was because it was like orange kind of inlaid in red. I mean, I'm more pink, but for some reason there was something there that felt like me, but I also feel that with the other things. So it makes me uncomfortable even talking about how to read a face. I mean, I am interested in that. I don't experience my work like that. Having said, I think I'm kind of a good reader of body language and faces.
Right. So that is something you kind of, as you move through the world, You think about those things?
As I move through the world, yes. I
Right.
think about those things.
In the studio, when you're working on this kind of painting, are
Yeah.
you comparing this one to that one, so to speak? Like as you complete them, do they start to push
Yes.
you to do other things with them?
Yes. Yes, they do. And they do. And that's interesting. And they do. And later I can end up copying myself. And then it feels forced and it's not as good. And later, like once I figured it out, I can hit it for a few times and it's really great. And then I can start copying myself and I get too precious because I so badly want what I had there, you know? And sometimes the scraping out really helps with that. Like you can cut it away, but I do experience it like that. I feel like there was something more I wanted to add, but I can't remember.
I'm really curious about, one of the things I think a lot about sometimes the relationship between artists and athletes, as people who
Yes.
pursue
Yes.
an internal excellence
Yes.
that they have an audience. So there's this
Yes.
audience judging their excellence,
Yes.
but there's also this other internal mechanism for judging excellence.
Mm.
And there's this repetition to like get it, to get it, to get
Yes.
it. And I'm curious, like when you say you can copy yourself and it feels too precious, like what's the like warning or trigger? I mean, that's sort of loaded psychological language, but
Right.
what stops you from the preciousness in yourself? Like where do you get caught up?
I think I just so badly want I so badly want when it works that I'm kind of willing to do whatever it takes to get there. And I go about it the wrong way, which is by looking at these things as opposed to trusting and referencing, if that makes sense. I think a lot about the athleticism in terms of being a painter. It's a very physical job. And I think about the dexterity. And I also think about like the hyper focus.
Right.
And I think about Michael Jordan, and I think about how he talks when he is in the zone. I've never read this, but I've heard that he sees himself as a, what are the insects that have the pinchers? The giant, like, I know someone's out there. They got like a weird head, like an alien head, and they go like this.
Like a praying mantis?
Praying mantis. So he feels like a praying mantis with like a teeny little ball and a huge hoop. And it's just like, there's nothing he can't do. And so I think about that.
That's so interesting because I think about, everyone talks also, I'm a huge basketball fan, about how Michael Jordan's like the greatest player of all time, maybe LeBron. But Jordan notoriously, showed up for practice before everybody and left practice after everyone left. And I have to say, one of the stories you just told, like a little flag went off in my head, like you're done painting for the day. You're going home, you're leaving your studio, and someone has prepared something for you to take home. Like you're still working, like you're still getting ready for tomorrow, even though the workday has ended. And I heard a shadow of like not wanting to let go. But maybe also not wanting to let go of the dexterity, like you've got to keep doing it. Is that why I mean, I understand the anxiety of not knowing what to do in the morning. I hate that feeling. I always make a to-do list at night, so I know exactly what to do tomorrow. But I'm curious if you're also like kind of keeping some synapses going between your brain and your hand.
One of the reasons I have it, so they actually would bring it home. I'd go home, I have dinner, it comes, they put it in a box. I take a shower, maybe I've gone for a walk and I take it upstairs, and in bed, then I do my drawings. And it allows me, one, to come to terms with what happened today, but also it actually maybe allows me to let go, because I don't have, now that I put pen to paper, I have a plan. Like you have a plan for the next day, then I can let go. Then I don't have to reconfigure it in my head.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
a way that I can let go, but I need something like that to let go, because when I'm doing things like this, it's like it triggers something that is very hard to shut off.
Oh, that's interesting. So there's a kind of, I mean, is it too crass to say there's a kind of OCD logic to this kind of
Yeah,
picture?
there's a lot of that.
Yeah,
There's a lot of
because
that.
it's one of the things it feels like. And one of the things I thought was so amazing when I first started looking at your sculptures, and we're looking at an install shot of them here from Grotjahn. I'm going to go to the next one, and then we're going to drop back to the Picasso, and then these felt to me, well, first off, I just fucking loved these when I first saw them. I was just like, oh my God, these are like amazing, because there's something like when you see an artist and you think you're in the pocket with that person and you're like, oh, I kind of know what I'm gonna see. And then I saw these and I was like, whoa, I'm mind blown, like Mark's gone to some other level. One of the things that they weren't to me was they didn't have that OCD obsessive, what they had was like finger paint and smearing, and they seemed to be playing around with not being in control. Whereas the more linear or calligraphic work seems so much about being in control. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about this move from the painterly to the sculptural, but also maybe this move from what feels like a lot of control to less control or more chance.
Okay. So it's oil on bronze. I started these as cardboard boxes. And they started actually before the faces at home. They happen while I'm living in my studio. I only paint the butterflies in natural light. When the lights go down, I've cleaned up my station, whatever it is. Then I've got these boxes that my art supplies are coming in, and I've got toilet rolls that I save because I'm saving them. I don't know. And so I have acrylic paints for my boxes, and the rigidness of the painting of the triangles is done. And I allow myself to take these cardboard boxes and like carve eyes and noses, and they're stupid, and I can get them dirty, and I can be expressive in a way that we traditionally think of artists as being expressive.
Right.
And I have them and I love them, and they're like little diaries, and only my friends see them. And I won't, okay, in the beginning, no one wants them. Later, I won't sell them. I keep them, but occasionally I'll put them in the back of a gallery, or I'll use them for my advertisement. And I use them on my poster for when I showed at the Hammer. So I don't think I've ever sold these, except I gave one for you wouldn't know Giovanni, but anyway, I think it's still true. I've never sold a cardboard box, but I gave some away and I traded with friends. I decided to cast them in bronze, which meant that each structure, the composition was done.
Right.
So the composition is done, and I could do 3 or I could do 9. And now I've got 9. I know where the eyes are. I know where the nose is, Right. And so then it's like I allowed myself a certain kind of freedom with these that I don't in my paintings. And so I could get my hands dirty, and I could do several at a time. And I could really feel it, like the way that the nose is like this, really feel it.
Mm-hmm.
and play in different ways. And so it allowed for a different kind of freedom. And here for me, the composition was totally done because it was all taken care of.
Right, right. So I want to just drop back because I think a lot of us, when we first saw the cardboard boxes, those of us who knew the history of Picasso in particular were immediately arrested by Picasso's cardboard constructions from the early, the first decades of the 20th century. And they came about due to his really profound encounter with African art, which precisely helped Picasso rethink the problem of composition, right? Like you'd had 600 sort of years of Western composition, and then all of a sudden there's this encounter with African art, and a lot of European artists realize like, oh, the nose could be sunken, the eyes could protrude, right? Like all these things start to get opened up in the field of composition. And one of the things I've often thought about your work, whether it's these sharp angles that happen in Demoiselle d'Avignon, whether it's the composition, this almost aggressive, acrid quality of the color, and then certainly when you started moving into sculpture, I began to understand you as someone who was invested in some way, the legacy of Picasso, like the kind of long arm of Picasso through the 20th century into the 21st. And I wonder, if that's something, were you thinking of that consciously? Is it too much to even bear because Picasso's so overdetermined? But you seem to be having a profound intergenerational conversation with this work. And I'm curious what that sort of feels like or means for you.
Well, I mean, I said that the faces come very directly out of Picasso. It's, can you make those almond-shaped eyes and actually make a good painting with it? That is the starting point. And I grew up coming to my grandfather's house and seeing like the giant Picasso books of Duncan. And like, him living in these places, and his art is everywhere, and his art is life. And it's, so it had a huge, profound effect on me when I was really young. And when I was really young, I could say that I was not drawn to this painting, but the bicycle handles with the bicycle seat, I was just like, you must be kidding. Like, I loved it. And so for sure, when I'm doing these things and I've got a box and then I stick on a nose, for sure, Picasso is a part. Also, for sure, Picasso is a part in terms of the construction with the cardboards, which also is with my face. Like, cardboard feels so Picasso to me and so Cubist. But I also think that the mass, because they call the bronze the mass, that it is also filtered through like LA, Mike Kelly, Paul McCarthy, like, dirty, sexual stuff like that. I think it definitely comes out of that. It's filtered through there, but it's also filtered through like, I love color.
Right.
Color. And this is, I think, named after a Monet painting, like, can I be Monet? Can I do that?
Right.
And it's just like, you can do it.
I want to drop back to the Mike Kelly, Paul McCarthy moment for a minute, because even though, like, no either or, right? Only and, right? So like, even though these are almost Monet-esque in their color palette, right? They're a kind of post-impressionist and impressionist palette. When I first saw them, and sometimes still when I see them, I can't get over like the word smear is in my head, like that the painting is smeared, like that there's something really childlike about the kind of way the paint is getting applied to the surface. Now, that may or may not be true in real life, but I know from your other paintings, when I look at them, I'm aware of extraordinary finesse and excellence and virtuosity even, right? In how the paint is being applied. And here it feels like the virtuosity comes from improvisation and messiness, not exacting. And there's something in this like smearing, finger painting, not being in control that makes me think of childhood. And I've always thought this about these, and I don't know quite why, but there's like a little emotional tinge of shame in them, like the not being in control of yourself, having to rely on an adult when you're a child, the realizing that the pictures they put on the refrigerator that you made weren't really any good, you know, like all of that kind of stuff that your adult self has to confront about your child self. And I just wonder if like that has any traction with you at all in thinking about these.
And thinking about these, well, there's one, just the shame that I feel while I'm making art, and I work very hard on that. So there's that, but you did hit on it with child and improvisation. So I don't necessarily know how I'm going to paint these. And I had a variety of ways of painting them. Some ways were like this. I had some Van Goghs, some were straight out abstract expressionism. I didn't have a plan, and I didn't need a plan. So that was glorious. And there was a certain kind of freedom. Also, like the paints get laid out, I put on my gloves and my hands are in it. I'm also physically dancing around it. So not only am I painting the thing on the front, I may be reaching around and tapping it. Like if you look here, there's some taps that may have, and they're on the side. So that may have happened by actually kind of holding it on both sides at the same time. But I'd also go and like, just play with it. So I allowed myself a lot of freedom. Some shame might come. For me, that my parents were always very supportive of my art making. It was one of the few things that I did, and you know, they were cool. They were supportive that way. But some of the shame might come in from honestly, from feeling the joy.
Oh, yeah.
Which is sad, right? That's kind of sad to talk about, that I would feel the shame. And you could look at that in terms of like being a little, like, why would you feel shame? Like there's nothing shameful about it. But also, you know, when I was coming up in terms of painting, as soon as I got to school, I was told that work should be political. And that if you were not part of the solution, you were part of the problem. And that happens at Boulder, where Lucy Lepard is the head of our of the visiting artist program, which, by the way, awesome visiting artist program. We had like Sue Coe, we had Mel Chin, we had Adrian Piper. Like it was awesome. But I was told immediately, like, but I don't think that's where the shame comes. I think the shame comes from feeling good about myself for a second and then needing to check myself.
That's so interesting to me, because one of the things that you said about the butterfly paintings that really resonated with me was that once you knew the shape, you knew what your job was. Like you knew what you had to do. And you began to talk very much in the language of work, labor, efficiency, right? And these are, I think, in America for sure, the things that we pride ourselves on and that we use to make sure we have value, right? Like, did I do a good day's work? You know, did I work enough? Have I done enough?
Yes.
And that's not how you're talking about these. You're talking about dancing and tapping and almost hugging. You're using all these words that are about intimacy, and then you drop joy. You know, because we've gotten all the way up here. Like, you don't talk about joy at the circus. Like, you know what I mean? So I'm really interested in, you know, is part of how an artist in general, or you in specific, navigates the great privilege of being an artist. So few people get to be an artist.
Right.
Is to like, you know, are you having to navigate some passage between the shame and the joy of like, did you do a good job today? Like, how do you measure yourself?
I lost myself a little bit in there, so I don't know I don't know where to come in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can throw it at you a different way.
Yep.
You think about Picasso, and
Yeah.
I know you've mentioned, art books, magazines. I know you to be a student of art history.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, as an artist, like draw the sustenance from that history without being basically neutered by it because it's so friggin' awesome and pretty much everything's already been done?
Right. Everything already been done that doesn't get in the way of anything. One, I'm not buying that, but while I'm painting, so many things come up. Like right now I'm doing some paintings, and I took a look at myself in the mirror, and my hair looked like the head of a rooster. And I was like, that's exactly how my paintings are looking. They're looking like they're shaped in like a rooster shape.
Mm-hmm.
I have that. When I do some of these colors, like, okay, if I've got the colors going one direction, it's like, oh, this looks like the African flag. If I do it another, it's like, it's the Italian. And so there are all these colors, or it looks like an Italian restaurant. This thing looks like an Italian restaurant, or whatever it is.
Right.
And it's like, oh, this is now I'm doing whoever it is that I feel like I'm doing and I'm tapping into too much, and it looks like those forms. Like I feel that, and I don't like it.
Right.
I don't like it when I feel it. It's like it's firing encyclopedic.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna because you started talking about your rooster. This is I haven't seen these in person, this series. So when your studio sent these images, I was really curious about these Capri pictures. And I wonder if you could if you want to talk a little bit about how you end up with this quasi-grid form, which seems to me like a really new move or gesture on your part to add these into the paintings.
Yeah. So I got invited to do a show at Malaparte, which is a house in Capri, to do like a one-day show, very fancy. It was my favorite residential piece of architecture in the world. I'd never been. And so I was like, can you just I'm probably going to do it, but can you give me 2 days to think about it?
Isn't that where they shoot the Godard film?
Yeah, and that's where I had seen it. That's how I saw it. And I was like, man, that thing is fucking incredible. And so I was just like, okay, I'm going to take the show, tell them I'm going to try and come up with a new body of work, but worst comes to worst, I'll just do a drawing show.
Right.
You know, so I could solidify it. Like I knew I could do it because I think I only had like 2 or 3 months before the show. And so I have been wanting to put the face away for a while. I've been wanting to stop that.
Why?
What?
Why?
Too much copying myself. It wasn't fun anymore. It was too easy.
Right.
I wasn't inspired.
Mm-hmm.
I was sick of the face. You know, I really wanted to go towards non-objective. And I've really been wanting to just you know, find my way of being like a real X guy. And so this was a cool enough venture that I could say goodbye to what I knew and see where I could go in something else. And so I continue to use the cardboard. I continue to use the palette knife. I had some eye shapes, but they weren't as eyes. And then ultimately the oval shapes ended up kind of crisscrossing like waves a little bit. The original ones that I did for the thing, they were all kind of different, and later I refined. I have since gone back and they're now like the originals, which was, I started as new capris, like new paintings, and then it was capris. I thought I reached something, and then it was free capris, which was like exuberance, and also just embracing the embarrassment of calling them capris, which was like capri pants for me.
Right.
So I start doing this. While I'm doing it, I'm making bad works and I'm scraping them. And I'm scraping them with a palette knife. And so when you scrape, the paint rolls up on your palette. And so I would look at that, and they're cool. They look like little swirls, little swirl. And I'd look at it, and then I started cutting them off the palette and putting them on a paper palette plate just to look at them. And then at some point I was like, are you gonna put those on your painting? And I was like, yeah. And I started laying them on my painting. So I started laying them on.
Oh, I get it now. But so that you're basically, so you're scraping paint off the palette, and you're getting a roll, almost like a roll of butter when you scrape a knife off it.
Off the painting. So the painting, I make the painting, it's bad, then I scrape it. Just the distinguish that it's not from the palette. And then, so it's actually, I'm recycling the bad painting. I end up recycling the bad painting and putting it right on the front. When I do that, I start like putting a few on the sides as if, well, the Mike Kelly, where he puts the two, see, it's like this, it's like constant, it's, oh, Mike Kelly, you know, I do it, and I'm like, oh, Mike Kelly did the corn in that one piece where it's in the corner. Or like I'm doing it like this, and it starts to look like Twombly writing his little things, you know? And so I do that, and it's poetry, and I'm figuring it out. And then I do a little grid. You know, this is happening over months. And I was like, are you really gonna do a grid? And it's like, I did like 4 lines over it. And I was like, you gonna do that right in the front of the thing? And I was like, yeah, I am. And then I did. And then again,
wait, I want to ask you a question first. So when you say to yourself, are you really going to do that? Are you really going to do a grid?
Yeah.
You must at a certain moment in there have a whole set of reasons for why you shouldn't. And then you must have some other function, executive function, that comes over all the should nots and says, no, I am going to. And I'm curious about both. Like, what makes you think I shouldn't do this? And then
you shouldn't, because it's so indulgent in the way that because the things that the slugs themselves, and they're actually more like caterpillars, but I don't use caterpillars. So so I scrape, so one, part of it feels indulgent. 2, it feels like you're fucking up a perfectly nice painting. It's just like, why do you need to do that? You know? But it's like, if you look at the butterflies, like sometimes I would sign my name on them. It's a little obnoxious. Or those beautiful paintings that I say like brings me joy. It's just like, there's a giant fucking nose on that thing. Like, try and get close to me, you know? So which has a lot of things. So it's like, are you really gonna do that? You're really gonna, that's really what you wanna put forth? That's how you want to present it? And it's just like, yeah, that is how I want to present it. Don't care. I'm presenting it like that. And then like what I've used a lot is like, okay, I've said this when I've done like lectures, especially at like schools and stuff, which is like, how do I do it? I pretend that I'm a good artist. I pretend that I'm a good artist. And it's just like, okay, if you were a good artist, what would you do? If you were fearless, what would you do? And it's just like, you do that. And then also then getting right sized, and it was just like, what's the worst case scenario is that it's a bad painting.
Right.
You don't have to show it. It's a bad painting. So what?
I love the difference between talking about how work is made and the whole process versus like where my art history, art criticism brain can go. Because I looked at these and my first thought was Annie Albers and like the rediscovery of Annie Albers and the rediscovery of weaving and her pictorial weavings of warp and weft. And I felt like you were using the grid, which is so essential to weaving, and then this really expressionist painting. But I love that, in fact, what you're thinking about is pretending to be a good artist so that you can give yourself the freedom to sort of misbehave. Anyway, Peter's hopped on. I bet it's time for questions.
Yes, we have quite a number that have piled up. So if it's okay, I'm gonna pop in and ask a few.
Go
To the
for it.
audience who have entered questions, thank you very much. A reminder to those who haven't, if you hover over the lower part of your screen, on the right side, you will see a little Q&A button. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit questions so I can combine some different people who have submitted. So my first question, Mark and Helen, is really about material. What is it about painting on cardboard that engages you within all these objects and this process? Why not a canvas or a hard surface like wood?
Okay, I'll answer that. But before I do, you mentioned Albers. Annie, I was thinking of Agnes Martin. That's who I see. When I see the grids, that's who I see. Because they're loose grids.
Right.
They're not perfect grids. They're loose. And that's who I feel. That's who I see there.
That's really interesting too, thinking about Capri and Malaparte. I mean, just in terms of landscape. But anyway, back to cardboard, because I too have always wanted to ask you, why do you paint?
Yeah, so cardboard comes out of the mass, which come out of, I get cardboard, it's gonna be thrown away. So I start painting on the cardboard. They're the boxes that my art comes in, or the boxes that my water comes in, or that my beer comes in. So it's a round and it's a surface. Number two, paint takes to paper. Excellent. If you want to make a good painting, put oil on cardboard. It always looks good. It's much more difficult to do it straight on canvas. Three, so I knew that when I started doing the faces bigger, so I had an excuse because they were small and I was recycling. Then how did I give myself permission to do cardboard larger, because I was doing them on canvas, is that a lot of the smaller ones I had done, I had actually carved out. So I would have the eyes, I'd carve them out, I'd hollow it, and then I'd stick the eye back in. So they were kind of actually physically sunken in. And so I started doing that. I started cutting triangles out in them and cutting my name out. So they were relief. So that's how I gave myself permission. And then at some point it was like, I don't need to carve it at all. That's how cardboard comes. But also it looks good on wood. I just haven't done it. Like paint on raw wood looks great.
Mark, I'm going to pull together a few. Actually, we just got another question popped in that kind of related to the cardboard question, which is really about sort of acid and disintegration. And is that kind of a part of your process with the cardboard, or is this something different? Like how do you think about that material and permanency?
Well, we've got some Picassos that have been around for a long time. They're also sealed, and they also make acid-free cardboard.
All right. A few questions kind of about early influences in your childhood. One, how did growing up in California, the particular time and place, influence your development? And some others about early influence on your work, artists beyond the Picasso books that you had as a child at your grandfather's house. Where do you see other artists that really influenced you early on and helped you find direction?
Well, help me find direction or influence me early on. Like when I got to high school, I saw myself doing designs. I did little designs. I had like my green things where I could trace out circles, and I made little mazes and stuff like that. So my art teacher there, Kit Ziegart, said, she showed me Kandinsky's The Spiritual in Art. And so when my friends were like doing comic book characters, I was reading about that. So that was important. Paul Klee was important early on. Moreau was important early on. Those were kind of the ones that I went to.
Did you go to a museum, Mark? Were you able, you grew up in Northern California. Did you see stuff in person?
Yes. My mom, I went there all the time with my mom, and we drive over from Mill Valley. And so there were like Clifford Stills and other Bay Area, I mean, Clifford was one of the big one. David Park was also there. Yeah.
Helen and Mark, I have a question really kind of about social practice. You made a comment earlier that when you got to art school, there was a culture of you better be part of the solution. This question talks a little bit about structure of your painting in that regard. So what does the vanishing point symbolize to you when used in an abstract painting? At a time of such political and social polarization, the use of a systems that brings everything to one point is really interesting. Does showing multiple vanishing points in one painting change the psychology of the work for you or the way people interpret it?
Well, I mean, like the butterflies come out of the three-tiered perspectives. I always saw them as just non-objective, but realistically, like they look like roads or sunsets, depending on the way they were. Like, I mean, when college, I'm talking undergrad, and I'll tell you what, my abstraction went to like figurative kind of Basquiat, Boslet, Liam Golub, and like doing things that where I thought I was, and who's to say I wasn't, talking about like American intervention in Central America, right? And then through like performance art that I was doing when I first got to Berkeley, which really freed me up to thinking that like art could be whatever, including being interested in line and color and being like, guess who's going to be making some line and color drawings and paintings. So, I mean, I'm not really touching on the social political. Actually, I am. I am. And there's also the insular, like, of the contemporary artists, like my generation, and what I'm saying to them very directly, like when I put my name on the front of my painting.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think, I often think about that film. I forget who, it's a film that follows James Carville during the Clinton election. And there's a moment when it's clear that this is Bill Clinton is going to win. And James Carville, the master of spin, begins to write Clinton's, I'm sorry I lost speech. And you realize like, oh, this guy he can write the acceptance speech and he can write the we didn't win speech on the flip of a hat. And I know I could do that around Mark's work. I know I could make that work resonate really politically from a progressive point of view about the fact that it does not have a single vanishing point, right? That the subject is destabilized, not held together. And in fact, you have to move around and stalk and go back and forth, and that it won't cohere. All of those things sort of getting to, I think what it is I'm really drawn to in Mark's work is an extraordinary degree of complexity in which what's being offered is formal erudition, art historical knowledge, self-awareness and self-questioning, and the production of an image that refuses to behave the way you think it's going to, right? So that you kind of, as a viewer, you have to be very nimble with Mark's work. And that is one of the reasons I really, really groove on the work. It doesn't look political, but the way I feel when I'm in front of it, it feels like it asks some ethical questions. Mm-hmm. And it's a kind of, It's a little bit of a bait and switch in a good way. And I really, really like that quality of the work. So Mark, I just want to actually really thank you for being so generous today with how personal you were about the work and your fielding of the questions from the group. It's been, I always learn something when I talk with you, and I'm just really, really happy that you joined us this afternoon.
Thank you. And thank you for saying those nice things and asking me to join you for this. It's really nice. Thank you. Means a lot.
Mark, Helen, once again, thank you so much. And thank you to all you who support the Anderson Ranch.
Bye, Mark. See you later,
Bye.
buddy. Bye, Peter.
Bye, Helen. Thank you.